Thanks for being here today. I'm Nate Eaton, and in our studio we have Fremont County Prosecutor Lindsey Blake. If you followed the DeBell trial, you definitely know who she is. And Lindsey, it's so glad to have you here. Have you adjusted to normal life?
Getting there.
Yes.
Yes.
It's been a couple weeks now.
It has been.
And does it feel good to be home?
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been making up time to my little boy.
Right.
So spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah. I obviously want to talk about the trial, but I want to go back to one thing I did not know until this trial, that you used to be a defense attorney.
Yes.
So what made you decide to switch from defending people over to prosecution?
So I did defense work for a little over 6 years, and I was actually a public defender in Bannock County. And that was where I really started into the criminal law side of things. And after some time, I just wanted to see what the other side was like, and just was ready for a change. And so an opening came up in actually Sublette County, Wyoming. So made a pretty big change of a move and switched over to the prosecution side.
Right. And then you ended up in Driggs?
Yes. So
Okay.
I was in Sublette for about a year. And when Billy ran for office there in Teton County, she'd ended up reaching out to me about coming to work as her chief deputy. So I ended up making that switch and went to the prosecutor's office there. I was there for between 2 and 3 years, I think, and then I switched over to Salt Lake actually for a year at the district attorney's office there.
Okay. Then you decided to come home.
Yes, I had some people reach out to me about whether or not I would be willing to run in the upcoming election, and they talked me into it.
And at the time that you were running, the DeBell case was underway, right?
It was. I think when I was in Salt Lake, I remember I had some coworkers that really were following the case. It was when the kids were missing, and they'd approached me about it to say, do you know any of the people involved? Because they knew I was from southeastern Idaho originally. And of course I didn't. So I had very limited knowledge of what was going on at that point. During the primary election, my predecessor had recently sent Tammy's death investigation to the Attorney General's office, and that was one of the issues that came up during the primary election. Some of the community felt that maybe we should consider bringing the case back and just having a little more local control with that. So that was an issue that came up during that primary election as well.
Right, and that's a big decision for you to make, because as a new prosecutor, newly elected in such a big case, you could have said, well, we'll just let the Attorney General handle it. Why did you decide to bring it back and take on this massive, nationwide, worldwide attention?
And I think people wondered what I was thinking at the time. So shortly after I won the primary election, that would have been in May, the children's bodies were discovered that next month. And I knew of the Tammy issue, and that had been a question of whether or not when I came in we'd take that death investigation back. Once the kids' bodies had been located in Fremont County, knowing that I was coming in that next year, I'd reached out to the Fremont County Prosecutor's office, and I was directed to Rob Wood because they had handed the concealment case off to him as a special prosecutor at that point. So I had made contact with Rob Wood, and we talked about it, and ultimately a decision was made that I was going to leave Salt Lake a little earlier than planned and begin working with Rob in his office to familiarize myself with the case and get a better game plan as to what we do going forward. So then when I actually took office, the AGs, we'd had a conversation. They were willing to send Tammy's side of it back. The main reason that I asked for it back and wanted to do it that way is I felt really strongly, having reviewed the evidence, that these cases needed to be put back together. And so once the AGs were okay with that, Rob and I had a conversation because he had the potential to move forward with some conspiracy or other charges there in Madison County. And then we had the opportunity to move forward as well with conspiracy and the homicides in Fremont County. So Rob and I had that conversation and agreed, we're both smaller offices, Madison a little bigger than us, but we agreed to essentially combine our resources and our manpower to be able to move forward. So he brought in his team. I think at that point he had Rachel working with him and a couple attorneys in his office, and then I brought in with me my chief deputy at the time, Tanya Rawlings, and that was a conversation she and I had had as well. She came from a public defense background as well, 15 plus years I believe at that point, so she had that experience from the public defense side as well, and we just made the decision that we did feel we could handle it as a team and move forward.
Wow, that's impressive. So you have this huge thing in front of you. How do you decide which angle to take? I mean, like, do you divvy it up into you're over this, evidence is coming in, massive amounts of evidence and exhibits and all of that. How do you, like, who sets the game plan forward?
That is a very good question. And I think a little bit at the first there was somewhat of a struggle, but I think we really hit a stride. And we also had kind of two different teams coming together, and we were joining into one team. And I was really impressed how quickly we were able to make that transition, because sometimes it doesn't mesh that well. But I think we were able to make that transition, and then Rob and I worked together to say, we really need to co-lead this thing, we really need to be the heads of the case as much as possible, but we ran it as a very team collaborative approach. I don't think anyone wanted to be saying, it's my way, this is how we have to do it. So we ended up doing team meetings monthly, and then as we got closer to things or as needed, we'd add more meetings in, maybe even move them up every other week or weekly. And then we would also be on the phone with each other pretty consistently in making that game plan. And we transitioned over time. So we did start initially, we'd kind of separated it into topics of the case. So we might have religion, the iCloud messages, the attempted shooting of Tammy. So we may have different categories that certain people were really focusing on. At some juncture, we ended up saying, hey, let's divvy it up by witnesses. That might be easier. And then determine what each of our assigned witnesses, their anticipated testimony, to make sure that we get everything covered. So it was kind of a evolving process behind the scenes. Pretty quickly as well, I think in one of our first meetings, we determined the theme. Some people on the team were very adamant, we've got to have a theme. And so they wanted that decided very quickly. And we were able to reach that theme of pretty consistent across the board, even if different phrases were used initially, that it was about money, power, and sex, and removing obstacles to get those things.
Right, and weren't those like the first 3 words you said in Lori's case?
They were.
But yeah, I mean, it was memorable, it stuck. And then in your closing as well on Chad's case. So was there any topic or witness that you personally wanted? Like, I want this. You were really fascinated by that?
I think so, and as an attorney it's hard, right? Because we have this team of everyone that's trial attorneys, we do trial work. And so I think on some level you all kind of have an interest in having every witness. But clearly, manpower-wise, it didn't make any sense. Right. We wanted to split that up. So for me, I did feel like Tammy's side was still going to be a challenge. We had a coroner originally determining natural death. We had the MEs later determining that it was homicide by asphyxiation. I did feel her portion of it may be a little more challenged. And so I did end up picking some witnesses to kind of focus in on that, because I wanted to try to make that as clear as possible. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to really fully understand it as well. So that was one of the sections that I had taken a pretty big group of the witnesses. In addition, prior to coming in, Rob had done that prelim, and so there were certain witnesses that he already had that attorney-witness relationship with, and it made sense to have him keep those witnesses. Right. So we had some new witnesses that no one had questioned before, so kind of figuring that out too. Right, and you mentioned that Tammy, in your eyes, may have been the more challenging one to prove as far as her death, who caused her death. Do you have a thought, a theory as to who actually did it? I think everyone on our team ended up coming up with a theory of who they think did it. And when we really look at what the evidence showed, we do have a device associated with Alex Cox down the road at the Salem Church, or in the vicinity of the Salem Church. And testimony was very consistent. No information, no knowledge ever gained that Alex knew anyone besides Chad in that area. And that happens to be the night before she's pronounced dead, that he's in that area. And then during Chad's trial, we had Melanie Pulowski, who indicated that she had been told Alex didn't go on the trip to Hawaii because he had to help Chad with something. So I think when you look at the evidence that we have, it seems to paint a picture of what very likely happened. And then coupled with testimony from both the state's MEs that testified about Tammy's cause of death and manner of death, as well as even the defense expert about some of the potential ways in which that death could have been accomplished. Right, and I think you laid it out good during the jury selection when you compared it to a football team, like the Kansas City Chiefs. Everybody on the team getting a ring, even if they may not have been on the field playing, and comparing that to the fact that even if Chad or Lori did not physically pull the trigger, quote unquote, they could still be
culpable for it. Talk about the challenges, or were there any differences between Lori's trial and Chad's? I think originally you were hoping they'd stay together, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
As people that followed the trial probably remember, we had, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 motions to sever at the end that we argued. So we really felt that it should have stayed together as one case. I respect the decision made by the court. I can understand the rationale, but it was something that we did feel, had we been able to keep it together, that would have been absolutely preferable.
So were there challenges, or did it actually help as far as Chad's trial, because you got the run through with Lori's, you were able to learn and change things, or was it pretty much not the same, but were there any obstacles between the two?
Yes, I think Lori's may have been a bit more of a challenge in certain ways, because even though we had been working on the case for years at that point, there is just so much information in this case, and filtering through what should we present versus what do we not need to present is always a bit of a challenge. Every attorney may see it a little bit different, and that's really one of the biggest values of having a team working on this, is being able to run that by each other. Some piece that I may have thought was super important, everyone else may say, well, let's table that, and in the scheme of things, let's figure out if we really need to use that piece. So that was challenging, I think, in Lori's, because we hadn't done it before, to really determine, and I think you get this religion that you could continue to go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. And so figuring out, how do we get it across and explain it in a way that these are purported beliefs. Whether or not they believed them doesn't really matter. What we're arguing and what the evidence is showing is they were using religion as a mechanism to manipulate those around them, and really figuring out, how do we get there without going too far down. And so I think that was always a bit of a challenge, even in Chad's, because we'd been through it with Lori's. I think we had a better idea of how to maybe process that and present it. The other challenge with Lori's is, for some of our witnesses, it was their first time ever testifying. And so when you talk about that witness split, you really want to be able to meet with a witness, develop a relationship with them so that they can trust you when they're on the stand. And I'll always explain to them, I'm just a conduit to get their information out. That's my job. I want them to be able to present what they know in a way that's going to make sense. And so that was maybe a little more of a challenge in Lori's, just getting people comfortable with that process.
Right. So
that was probably a bigger challenge on her side.
Right, and you could tell, even, well, as an observer, like even with Zulema, during the second trial, she seemed far more comfortable on the stand. And so I think maybe you're right, they can testify one time, they know what to expect down the road, and the next one.
Yes.
Did you at any point think, okay, this is the piece of evidence, we got them, like, this is it? Or was it, I mean, there were so many of those moments, at least as an observer, but was there one thing that you thought, okay, this is really going to convince the jury?
I think for me, every witness that we called ended up having some piece of information that we absolutely felt was valuable for the jury to hear. And it's always hard for me to gauge what is going to be that piece for somebody else, because I may look at something and think this is really good, and someone else may not think it's as strong in showing culpability. I think as much as we could use their own words, so jail calls, body cam footage, the iCloud messages, anything where it's Chad and Lori's own words, or Alex's if we had access to that, which at times we did, I think that is sometimes the most telling. It was a circumstantial case, so for them to be able to hear it in Chad and Lori's words. And of course, when we talk about, was there a plan, this is a conspiracy, those iCloud messages clearly, from the state's perspective, laid that out.
Right. Did you expect Lori to testify?
I wasn't sure. I never know if a defendant's going to take the stand or not, and so we definitely anticipated that it was a real possibility. And I think we weren't sure until right up until the very end, when the decision was made by the defense and Lori that she was not going to. So we were prepared for it. We had a plan in place as to how we would handle the cross-examination.
Were you going to cross?
I was going to do the cross-examination.
Yeah. And did you have questions prepared?
I had an idea of some questions that I would want to have prepared. Obviously with cross it's a little bit different. You have your idea, but until you see what they actually testify to, because you have to keep your cross within the scope of what they talk about generally, unless there's any agreement to go outside of the scope. So it was going to be a blanket idea of what we wanted to do, I think we were going to want to keep it as simple as possible as well, was going to be one of the goals, to try to make sense of whatever she was going to say.
Right. Did you want her to?
I always am interested to see what a defendant has to say if they're willing to take the stand.
Yeah. Same with Chad. Did you think he would take the stand, and were you prepared for that?
We were prepared for that as well. I was going to handle his cross-examination if he were to take the stand. So again, had an idea in place. We weren't sure if he would or wouldn't take the stand, so we were prepared for it in case he did.
And obviously, for those people that may not have seen it, both of them did not take the stand. But Lori did speak at her sentencing. What did you think of that?
I think I was a little surprised to hear her say so much. She'd been pretty quiet up until that point, and it was an interesting statement from her.
Interesting, that's a good word. Good word to use. You, during all of this, are managing your office still in Fremont County. I mean, it's not like crime stops. How did you manage being in Boise for 2 years in a row for 3 months at a time, while still running the office, while still keeping things going at home?
That is a great question. Sometimes I look back and I'm not exactly sure. So
Right.
Fremont County is a very small office. When I came in, there were 2 attorney positions and we have 3 staff positions. So for the duration of Lori's prep time, Tanya and I both were carrying full caseloads. She did the full misdemeanor infraction caseload, and I had the juvenile and felony caseload. So we were handling those caseloads while preparing for trial. We ended up getting an attorney position approved just because our case numbers in general had gone up, not even including the DeBell side of things. So we ended up bringing in a new attorney who was Rocky Wixom, and he took over that role for us while we were in Lori's trial. He ran the attorney side of things by himself. So we had really great staff, Tiffany Meekum, Pat Smith, and Cheyenne Schultz at that time during Lori's trial. And then for Chad's trial, we'd made a couple changes. As people are probably aware, Tanya Rawlings ended up being appointed as a Bonneville County magistrate, which I was very excited for her. It was definitely bittersweet to have her leave before we were able, especially to finish this case out. We ended up also having a change in our office. We brought in a lady named Paula Pack, who's our victim witness coordinator, and we'd really transitioned one of our positions to be very much focused on the victim side of things. So Paula came in and joined our team for Chad's trial. When Tanya stepped out, Rocky stepped in to her place and was willing to kind of hit the ground running, learn the information. He didn't have a ton of time to get up to speed on things, so he did a fantastic job and was willing to do that. And then we were able to bring in a gentleman named Aaron Tolson, who worked as the attorney in our office while we were gone. So my staff did an amazing job helping keeping it going. Rocky during Lori's and then Aaron during Chad's were instrumental. Yeah. I will also say the community as a whole was extremely supportive and very willing to be understanding of my office's situation, that we were shorthanded, and very willing to work with us. So Fremont County as a whole, the sheriff's office, the courts, they were fantastic to us.
Right. What did you think, and how did you handle the intense media coverage? And I ask this, as a reporter, not just from me covering it extensively, but worldwide. I mean, there's reporters there from big news outlets, New York, even the UK. How do you, as a prosecutor, still protect your case while knowing that, it's getting reported on every day?
I think it's somewhat of a challenge. The biggest thing with the media coverage really is when we're looking at selecting a jury, because we always have to filter through how much exposure has a potential juror had. Is it enough that we think it's going to create an issue with their ability to remain unbiased? And most potential jurors, I think, are extremely willing to discuss that, be open and honest about how much they think it's affected them. So for us, I think it's just keeping track of and being cognizant of what information has been put out there. Is it something that could be concerning for a juror's ability to stay impartial, so that we're covering that as we go through our jury selection process? So I think that's the biggest thing as an attorney. We just try to be cognizant of what has been put out there so we can make sure we address it.
And there was a lot of those questionnaires that went out to people in Ada County, and even some of the questions for those people that didn't see jury selection. Media was brought up, have you seen the Netflix show, things like that. What was the biggest challenge for you?
That's a good question. I think trying to find any kind of a balance during that, and that's why I say I look back and sometimes I think, I don't know how I did it. It was a very chaotic time. I had found out I was expecting during the grand jury process, actually. So ended up having my little boy, and I think within a month of his birth, maybe, we had one of the hearings on the motion to sever. Maybe it was a little over a month, and I was handling that. So just trying to figure out how to really make sure I dedicated enough time to my son, and made sure that I gave this case enough time, and made sure that I gave my office enough time, because as you indicated, crime doesn't stop. And I always say, whatever case I've got in front of me at the moment needs to be the most important, because it is the most important to someone else. It's the most important case to the defendant that's going through it. It may be the most important case to a victim if the victim's involved in it. So for somebody, that case is going to affect their lives. And so my focus needed to be on that. So trying to just balance all that and figure out how can I make sure that we take care of everything.
Right. One of the ladies wrote, a viewer wrote and asked me, what was it like bringing a baby into the world while preparing a trial for a mother who murdered her own children? Did it make reviewing the evidence more difficult as a mom, or only strengthen your resolve?
I think for me, I've gotten pretty good at compartmentalizing. So to try to be able to separate it from my own personal life as much as possible. But definitely there are moments when you're holding your new little baby and wondering, how a mother could be involved in that, or how a mother gets to that point that they would let anything happen to that little one.
I noticed probably at least once or twice during the trial of Lori, you looking at her when a witness would be on the stand, or just watching her. And I was curious, what maybe, you probably don't recall the time, I'm sure you did it a few times. I think everybody in the courtroom would look at her just to see, but this was more of a, I don't know, a what are you thinking type look, or would you try to look at her and try to analyze what she was thinking, or prepare maybe your next questions for the witnesses based on how she was?
Yeah, I do have a bachelor in psychology. I'm interested in psychology in general.
Okay.
Not that by any means it puts me anywhere near an expert level, but I am curious. And so I do think, I recall trying to look at her and gauge where she was at, try to gauge what her expression was at the time, how she may be taking it in, what her reaction was. I think I'm always curious what people are thinking, especially a defendant in a courtroom. Is some evidence hitting them harder? What is going through their mind in that moment? Yeah.
Talk about how long it took you to put together, in Lori's case, the opening statement, which was memorable. I'm sure, did you hear all the reporters typing?
Yes.
I think everybody did. It picked up in the court recorder. We were right behind you, a row of us with laptops. We're frantically typing every single word that Lindsey's saying, and put it out there. And then, so how long did it take you to put that together? And then in Chad's, the closing.
So I tend to sometimes work better under pressure. So I'll throw that out there. But we had talked as a team. Obviously, we'd come up with that theme. We'd met as a team, and some of the attorneys would kind of go through and say, if I were doing the opening, I might do things like this. So we'd had those team meetings, had an idea of where we wanted to go. And at some point I said, why don't we do this? Let me sit down and write out what I think. I know I'm going to be missing some stuff. And of course, for us, because different attorneys had different witnesses, I knew there might be something that a witness was going to talk about that was absolute paramount to an attorney that I didn't realize. So I remember it was on a Sunday. My mom was over in Boise with me during that time. Sky was out of town, my significant other, and he was out of the country during part of Lori's trial. And so my mom had come over to help with my son. He was about 14 months old at the time. So on a Sunday, I said, Mom, I'm going to run to a coffee shop for a couple hours and I'll be back. So I still remember I went to a Starbucks there on State Street in Boise, found a quiet area, sat down, wrote out the opening. I think it took approximately 2 hours to get it written out. And I thought, I'm someone that if I try to redo it multiple times, I'm going to go down rabbit holes. Right. So I got it typed out. I sent it out to the team and thought I'll wait for their feedback. They may say, we don't like any of this. We like all of it. So each team member made some edits. They added some pieces that were absolutely instrumental. They thought we should definitely have people hear those parts, made some corrections, took out a few things, and then rehearsed it a couple times. And that was the opening.
Every time you drive by that Starbucks now, you're going to be like, that's the place.
That's the place.
And did you do the same with Chad's closing?
So Chad's closing was a little bit different. And with Lori's, Tanya Rawlings ended up working with me to put together the PowerPoint, help me select photos. We wanted to have some photos that were not too graphic, too extreme, but started to paint the picture of what the jury was going to see. For Chad's, Rocky ended up working with me on my PowerPoint to try to make sure. He was the one that was very adamant and instrumental in saying, hey, as much as possible, we want audio clips of Chad. And so we really tried to incorporate those, and he helped me putting that PowerPoint together. And then as far as writing it, I'd written up kind of a rough draft, probably same thing, spent several hours on it, and then we met as a team, kind of ran through it, and then that night really went through and made it more detailed and to include the PowerPoint as well. Also in preparation of it, during kind of the dead time, I'll call it, that we had during that trial right before the close, I went back and I'd listened to quite a bit of the testimony to make sure, especially from the beginning portion of the trial, anything that I might have missed or forgotten about that should be incorporated.
Because there was so much.
Yes.
I don't know how you take all that and summarize it into 30, 40 an hour, but it was very, very effective. And having the timeline on the easel too, I think helped the jurors see that. Okay, so what is it like once the jury has it? Do you have any rituals that you do? What did you do, during that time?
So I was actually kind of surprised during Lori's. Again, I think I just compartmentalized a little different. So to me, once the jury had it, it's in a way a sigh of relief.
Right.
We've done our job, especially we made it through without any major hiccups, any major mistakes, because anytime you have a trial, you're going to expect something. Something's going to go wrong, and you can't anticipate what it is. It's different in every trial. So it's kind of that sigh of relief. And for me, I think I went home and I was also kind of at a loss. I was so used to getting done with court and having a million things to do, and now having any free time was just very, very different than what we'd experienced lately.
Right.
So it's kind of that sigh of relief too, but you also have that apprehension. I remember getting to the courthouse for Lori's after the jury had gone home for the night that next day. I got to the courthouse, I think I brought in some donuts for people, and a lot of the team was already there. And some of them were pacing the hallways, some were meditating. Everyone had their own process for dealing with that. And for me, maybe I just am able to kind of say, okay, that's over here, and I'm just going to look here now until the verdict's back. So I remember on Lori's, I'd started to head to lunch with some of the law enforcement officers, and we stopped in the middle of the sidewalk because I'd gotten the text that the verdict was in, and we headed back. And on Chad's, same thing. I think I got to the courthouse, and a lot of the team was already there, just kind of waiting for the results. And I think within a couple hours of my getting to the courthouse, we had the verdict back, or had gotten word that it was back.
Did you sleep well that night before?
I'm trying to remember.
You have a little boy, so you probably, I've got kids too. You don't ever really sleep well.
I have the child that does not like to sleep, and somehow he can take a 10-minute power nap and go for probably another 24 hours.
Right.
So I don't remember if he was, I don't think he was with me. So that night I probably did sleep. I think he didn't come back into Boise until a few days after that. So.
Okay. But your mom was there, right?
My mom was there,
How
yes.
was it to have her in there? Like, this is two career milestones, I would imagine.
Yes, it was amazing. So I have been very, very fortunate. Both my parents are just incredible people, very supportive of me. Absolutely two of my biggest cheerleaders. And of course, people know my dad passed away during Lori's trial. So to have my mom be able to be over there was just an absolute blessing.
Right.
She's an absolute rock for me. She's always been one of my biggest supports in life. And so to have her there was amazing. I think it was good for her and a nice experience for her to be able to see what I do, what that environment was, get to meet a lot of the people that she's heard about. So for both of us, I think it was just a once-in-a-lifetime experience, really, to be able to share that with each other.
Was it a little weird, I'm sure it was, to kind of be under a microscope to the fact that when you're telling the jury about your son liking eggs, that everyone now in the comments wants to know the recipe. And when you get a haircut, everyone's like, whoa, she got a haircut. It was like Marcia Clark during O.J. Simpson. She got a haircut. It was like cover of People magazine. I mean, was that a little odd to have all these personal things now suddenly? I mean, I'm tweeting about it, it's out there.
Not really. I think it's different, right? That people want to know those things because they're just everyday things for someone, right? And so definitely to have people interested and curious is different. It's an adjustment.
Right. Were you recognized around Boise? And back, now that you're back home, are people coming up to you and talking about the case?
I really have not had a lot of people recognize me. In my hometown, yes, people will come up because they know who I am. I'm from there originally.
Right.
So
Yeah.
they'll come up, but not a lot of recognition outside of that. Well, maybe I should tell you. So behind the haircut too, I normally would not cut my hair in the middle of a trial.
Okay.
I actually, you read about it. I'd never had it happen, but some of my hair was fried off, quite a bit of it, during the trial with getting it done. And so I made the decision to make a change. But normally I wouldn't do it in the middle of a trial because I have people saying, why would you cut your hair in the middle of a trial?
Well, it looked good. It's a good haircut. And I always believe that women are under far more pressure than men as far as, you know, getting a haircut or changing an outfit. People tend to talk more about that. All right, I have a few questions from viewers. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
And a lot of them you've answered. Why didn't you use the storage unit video? You know, there was surveillance footage at the storage unit where Chad and Lori were coming and going and Alex was coming and going too. Was it just one of those things that you had so much evidence already you didn't need it?
Yeah, it was. We talked about using it. I remember especially in Lori's trial, we'd really gone back and forth as to whether we were going to introduce it. I know in Chad's we were able to get mention of it through a witness that there was a storage unit of Chad and Lori dropping off a tire. And so just in filtering through how much of the evidence do we use, at some point we had to start saying certain things we're not sure, even though we might think they have some value, are in the scheme of things, are they going to be what's going to be the make or break?
Right. I think Rob mentioned that in our interview that, you know, it can be overwhelming if you try to throw in everything. So you really have to pare it down.
And that was hard. And even with witnesses, certain witnesses probably had a lot more we could have tried to glean from them. But at some point we had to start to say, okay, let's try to get in and get the major points and then be able to move on.
Where do you think Chad was when Garth got home?
I don't know. And I don't know if we'll ever know because, of course, we have conflicting stories. We have Garth saying one thing and we have Micaiah Baglin saying Garth told him something else. And because we weren't able to locate any device associated with Chad to even kind of give us that insider inkling into where he was, I don't know if we'll ever know for sure.
Right, and I'm sure a lot of these, I believe you'll have the same answer, like where was the rest of Tylee's body? Right,
and same thing, I don't know if it could have been moved around the property, if it is somewhere else. Unfortunately, unless we have some of the key players ever talk to us, we're probably always going to have some unanswered questions.
Right. Would you want to talk to Chad and Lori, like today, tomorrow?
I probably would, if they were ever willing to have a conversation. Obviously, I have a lot of questions for them. As I said, if they had been willing to testify, I'm always interested to see what a defendant has to say, what their version of events may be, or what information they may throw out there, whether or not we believe it. So if they were ever willing to have a conversation, yes.
In total, how many hours would you guess you've put into these trials and cases over the years?
Oh, that is a great question. I think at one point we'd estimated probably about 40 hours per week on this case, and then trying to keep up with the other work. So give or take, definitely some weeks less time, some weeks more time. So, but I would estimate every week was 30 to 40 hours probably.
And for those people on the comments that complained during the trial of why are they getting out at 3:30, go till 5, as Lindsey said, their day's not done. It's far from done. You got to prepare for the next day.
Right.
And was that more challenging during the defense portion of Chad's because you didn't really know which way things were going to go? Like you got to be prepared to cross-examine and be prepared for the next witnesses?
I think for me personally, it was probably a very similar process. If I have a witness going up, I try to review their police reports. Of course, I've met with my witnesses if I'm going to call them. I've prepped with them, meaning I've kind of gone through questions with them, given them some insight into what I think they might be asked, and we go through everything. And then I will go and review their reports, especially if they've given multiple interviews. So in preparing for cross-examination, for me, the biggest difference was I didn't have the benefit of sitting down with that witness and talking to him beforehand. But I was still going through police reports, any incident reports that may involve them, some of the recordings where they may have been on those recordings. I was reviewing those in anticipation for cross-examination.
Yeah. What did you think of Emma's and Garth's testimony?
I thought they were interesting as well. First time ever hearing that much from them. Of course, we had heard some statements from Garth before. He had participated in a few interviews. We had some snippets of information that had been provided by Emma, or statements, maybe things that we learned through other witnesses that couldn't be presented at trial because they were hearsay, but we were aware of those statements. So I wasn't necessarily shocked when they testified the way they did. I think they have a dad that's been accused of a very serious crime, facing a very serious consequence. And so I wasn't necessarily surprised to have them testify the way they did, and I think we had anticipated certain parts of the testimony.
Right. Were you surprised that Chad did not present any mitigation?
I think I was a little surprised. And maybe just having done defense work, I always kind of expect the unexpected in a way, because you just never know what a defense attorney or a defendant may decide is right for their side of the case and how they're going to proceed forward. And when I was a defense attorney, same thing with the state. They may do something that caught me off guard. So I think I wasn't completely shocked, but it was definitely different to not have any mitigation presented. But yeah. I figured that either the defense or the defendant had made that final decision.
What do you think happened to Alex Cox?
That's a good question. I think definitely there's speculation out there regarding his death. I do know that an autopsy was done that concluded that it was natural, but obviously phone calls from Chad and Lori right before, the patriarchal blessing, the messages sent in that, his trip to Mexico, I think people are always going to wonder, and it's always going to leave that open, what really happened to Alex Cox.
Did you speak to the jurors following the trial for Lori, and if so, what did you learn that was useful as you helped prepare for Chad?
Yes, and I think you'd kind of ask about some of the struggles with Chad's, and we just kind of talked about Lori, so I kind of glossed over that. But absolutely, we did meet with the jurors. Anytime jurors are willing to meet with us, and I say us because I think the whole attorney team felt this as a whole, from both the attorney team from Lori's and the change team with Chad's, some of the new members that came in, that we like to get that feedback from jurors on what we can do to improve personally. If our presentation style can be improved, because generally speaking, we're not getting the benefit of doing another trial. So that was the difference with Lori's, is not only could we get some feedback on our personal styles, our presentation, what went well, what didn't, but we could talk about some of the evidence, what came across clearly, what didn't. And so the jurors in Lori's case were very candid with us, I think, which I absolutely appreciate. And we were able to learn that maybe one of the big things, and I think this has come out from other people as well, but the timeline being a little more clear. Mm. We have a crime that spans a significant amount of time. We have multiple key dates, and so to be able to keep that clear. So we took that feedback, and really with Chad's, Tanya Rawlings and I sat down afterwards and kind of said, let's come up with an idea of a witness list and take it to the team and see what they think. And Tanya really was instrumental in creating the witness order that we saw in Chad's trial. Of course, we had some new witnesses come in, some that got removed from the list, some that we had to shuffle, but we tried to, as much as possible, go from point A clear through the end to point Z, yeah, and present it in a very linear fashion. And then we'd also talked about the fact in the opening, I didn't necessarily really flag that there was going to be a timeline that should be followed. So I think Rob did a really good job in his opening of flagging that right at the outset for the jurors. Oh,
interesting. And not only do you have a timeline that's complicated, you have so many people and they have multiple names.
Yes.
So you've got to keep the jurors lined up with Chad is also, James is also Raphael, those type of things. A lot of the people were surprised who actually came to the trial that there was, that you were civil with the defense attorney during the breaks. Everybody sees TV and thinks that there's fighting going on. And they wanted to know, like, in general, and don't get specific here, but what happens in sidebars?
Generally, sidebars are called because we want to talk about something that we don't know that the jury should hear. So it may be an exhibit needs to be modified. We could talk about that in a sidebar, so we're not flagging the jury to it. It could be one of us has a question about, hey, we want to go here with the evidence. We're a little bit concerned. We want to get an advanced ruling on it. So we have those anytime there's something that could contaminate the jury or somehow create any kind of an issue in our minds, we'll ask for a sidebar to be able to discuss that. Sometimes we may call a sidebar as well just to talk about the schedule for the rest of the day. Where are we at witness-wise? Where are we at time-wise? So they're not always super complicated or intense. It may be just some basic things. We want to have that discussion outside of the purview of the jury.
I think I know your answer to this, and I don't know why you would announce it here, but is anyone else going to be charged in connection to this case? And you're welcome to announce it here if you want.
I would decline to comment on that one at this time.
Understandable. What's next for you?
Well, I was on the ballot for Fremont County again this year, and no one ended up opposing me. So I am anticipating just starting my second term in Fremont County in January.
Would you ever want to be a judge? Would you ever want to be like Attorney General, Governor? I
get asked that. I never know where my career might take me. I've made several different jumps in life, so I will never count anything out.
So you might be open to it if the right opportunity came along. Are you into true crime?
Yes.
So you're interested in other cases or podcasts, things like that?
Yes.
I know some people when they get home they turn it off, but you're interested in it. What should people know about the case or about you that we don't know?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think about me, I found out some people were surprised to learn this. I'm originally from St. Anthony, so for me when I took that position it was coming home. And I'll always joke with people that I'm a stereotypical Idahoan. My parents were actually potato farmers. So I have a younger brother that's taken over that family business. But I was born and raised in Idaho. I've worked in Wyoming and Utah as well as far as an attorney, but ended up coming back to this area.
And anything about the case that you think, or about law in general?
You know, I have people talk to me a lot about whether or not they should go to law school. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
I always tell people one nice thing about law is you can actually get a bachelor's degree in anything, and some people don't know that. So if anyone has interest in going to law school, I say get a degree in something that you could use as a backup. So if you get to law school, you don't like it, you've kind of left yourself another career path that you can take. But also don't ever think that you can't do it. People always say law school's got to be so hard. My opinion, anyone can do law school. It's a lot of reading. If people don't like to read, they may struggle with it. But a lot of reading, anyone can do it. But really, then come out and make your own career path. And don't let the naysayers discourage you. If you want to do something, you can absolutely do it.
Do you plan to follow the Arizona trial for Lori?
Yes, I think I'll at least want to keep some tabs on it, see how it goes.
Right.
And I am interested to see how they do their presentation of evidence, what maybe is similar to how we did it, what isn't. Also, I think their prosecutor has a lot of experience. I'm always open to seeing how somebody else does something that maybe a method that I want to adopt or that I think goes really well.
And can you share the cheesy egg recipe?
I can. I wish I had exact measurements though.
Yes.
But I usually just kind of whatever Legend wants, he gets pretty much. But a couple eggs, and then I add some milk, and I'll add the salt and pepper. And sometimes I mix the cheese into it before putting it in, and I always use butter. Some people use like a cooking spray. I always use butter.
Right.
And sometimes I'll fry the egg up first, and usually I think I do it this way. I start the scrambled eggs, and then as they're starting to get done, I'll throw the cheese in and just really mix it in so that it ends up really gooey.
We should have our viewers make their own version, and you could be the judge.
Yes.
The thing is, we probably have 400 people show up with eggs, and or have your son be the judge. Yes.
Yes.
Anything you want to add?
I know we got a lot of support from the public through the trial, and really all the kind words that have been said about all of us is really amazing. You don't expect that. In fact, I think in our field you get a lot of criticism. Mm-hmm. So to have those really kind words and comments means a lot. I think obviously it's been talked about, but the amount of individuals that were involved in this case and the amount of individuals that either put their lives on hold or made other arrangements to stick with this case through to the end are absolutely incredible to me. The people I met through this case, if we could go back and never have this happen, absolutely that would be my preference. But the people that I've met working on this case are just incredible. And I can't say enough good things about them. I can't say enough good things about our communities that supported us, knowing we were going to be losing some community resources or kind of taking away from our communities a little bit as these trials went on. The amount of local support has been absolutely incredible as well. And then, of course, the jurors that didn't sign up for this. As an attorney, we know we may get a case like this. We go into criminal law knowing. Jurors don't. And so what they had to see and go through, I have a lot of respect and admiration for every one of them. And then, of course, the victims in this case. I always say, I'm a fixer. I want to try to make problems better. And in a homicide case, you can't. And I know we're never going to make things better because we can't bring the beautiful people that were lost back. But I hope that the families have a sense of justice and healing and can start that process of moving forward. But every single victim that I met in this case are just, their strength and perseverance with this, I don't know how they did it, honestly. And so I just hope the best for them going forward.
Yeah. Lindsey Blake, thank you so much for chatting with us today, and big kudos to you and your team and all of the other prosecutors that will hopefully put an end to this 4 or 5 year saga that's been going on.